Where then is it safe to assume? If an assumption itself is based on the precept of there being a right and wrong answer, for the word denotes a form of intrigue, which itself is collateral damage in the pursuit of a being seeking truth. Though, what good is the truth if the truth itself is silent in its knowing? Then where one would be safe in their assumptions is then in dealings with what it is that would give a response as to there being some sort of truth. Whereas when getting to the root of it itself denotes a furthering of one's position in space, where then truth itself is an object, where then the soul's inquiry as to truth is seemingly unquenched. If the truth itself is a place that one moves to, then in their beholding the truth, is their appetite satiated? Where then the quest for the truth itself is in dealings with forms that themselves are moving, what are inquiries as to what the truth is. Then if one is to feel the truth being satiated, is then in dealings with where one would come to assume things. For if the real truth itself is in being where there is no inquiry, then where is the reverberation to give the sense of a postulation, the feeling that its inquiry has been satisfied? what is then a pathway of sharing the truth? That the truth itself is then taken as to where inquiry itself has been led along a line of inquiry where the one who is seeking safe assumptions knows that really the truth is stable and the truth is out there. What means that at times when dealing with inquiry, you are safe to assume to get to the truth, wherein by having no assumptions as to what the truth is, there is no movement from where one is, which is to say there is no inquiry, which is to say that there is nothing to go on. Then if one knows how to assume correctly, is then in their dealings with inquiry on the spot, where each locale itself harbors something stable. Then in seeing what forms there are in movement, then the movement itself is a reverberation. What is seeking to be satiated. Though then, if one is to assume correctly, is to then bring along the inquiry where if one simply sits in inquiry, then there is no taking the inquiry itself to where it is stable. For inquiry itself is manifest form as the personages that we commune with. Where inquiry itself then grows as a thing within ourselves, where then we become what is perhaps the reverberation or perhaps the inquiry, where then taking the inquiry to where then it is stable is then a tricky maneuver. For genuine inquiry states that for the movement to be correct, we must not base our movements off of a guess. Though in knowing what the truth itself is and what inquiry itself is, we are then safe to assume in then dealings with reverberations, as to then they're stating that we ourselves shouldn't move, then what does that say about our state? If the inquiry itself is saying that there should be no movement, then does that itself present a scenario which has been described as to then the nature of things in regards to things then seeking the truth, as the truth is then something stable? Then what should we be looking for if the general inquiry itself is holding us in a position? Then either the nature of the inquiry wishes to remain confined to the here being, or it knows not the nature of its own inquiry, whereas then we must understand how to then gauge the inquiry of an inquiry. as to then a satiation of something that knows not why it moves. Then we must gauge why it is that things themselves move. Then in so doing, we can create movements, where then movement itself is the truth. Then the inquiry is the truth. Then no longer are we simply waiting for the reverberation of the truth when it is that we come across what it is that is stable, but then the movement to stability is a truth in understanding why it is that things then move. Then we are safe to assume, if we know how to assume correctly, in understanding the forms of truth and the generalities of inquiries and reverberations that give things a sensation and a satiation of there being a different movement. Then we must gauge our own movement in regards to our own satiation. Where then each assumption made is simply a step. A step taken that knows the nature of causing things to either second guess themselves as to then the nature of movement itself for the general purpose of being an inquiry, what is seeking a reverberation. Where a reverberation of a thing's total truth is a mute point. Where a thing's inquiry, what says that each movement isn't safe, for it is an assumption, then knows not where it wishes to move to. Then it wishes to create a movement that is unknown to it, for it wishes to go somewhere that it knows not how to get to. Then, assuming correctly, we can say that the pathway for this inquiry to then make a move is in gathering up necessary steps for it to then create a new movement. Where then it can reach its destination. Where then the destination is a reverberation of this truth. Then even there, if the only inquiry, what says there is no safe way to assume for where it is going is not. Then we are safe to assume that they wish to dream. Where slumber itself is a guess, is it not? Though, like we have assumed previously, if we are to say that assumption itself is a knowing enough of what searching is, to then satiate a response, either through something stable or a reverberation that gives something a sense of validation. Then if dreaming is an assumption, in that it is a step taken where, with increased inquiry, we are told that it is not safe to assume we can go into a dream where then this inquiry, which knows not where to go for where it wants to go, isn't. Then we could make the assumption that life is the dream. Given the nature of life itself. As to then where this dream that they have will be life. When they assume it is safe to go to sleep. Then the truth seems to be an appearance. Where the assumed truth is in the nature of then what it is that things want to see. For there is much to see. Where then even the hard truth itself isn't ever reached. unless one feels they are safe to assume they can go there. Where then all one is doing is dealing with appearances, and then regards to how they themselves wish to appear. Where at times the soul's general inquiry gives a thing different appearances. Then the good truth knows how things wish to appear in regards to their soul's satiation. Where then one can only get there if they know how to assume correctly whether or not there is a place that is here or a place that is not, wherein if it's not, then in making this place appear as not, so that then we can assume that the place that is not here isn't here because it isn't. It is because it is where things are. And let's assume we can get there. Then in one's ability to deal with inquiry, with then assumptions made to then cause a movement from a position that then makes life itself seem as though their inquiry isn't here, then by in taking them to where then the truth of life is seen as something which is as incomprehensible as what isn't. Then is taking them to where then the truth is, as to then an allowance for the way for them to reach the truth of their inquiry. Though the inquiry it is stated as such as to its being far from being a place that can be reached, where then, though in reaching it is in reaching a place that then gives allowance for life to then be beyond what then allows the beyond to be reached, where then the assumption is made to move from inquiry for then along the way through the movements, through the dialogue, for then the reverberation to collapse under a stable truth, where then one must match the dialogue with a satiation with the movement and the inquiry to then satisfy a sense of stability once it is reached. Where then, if assumption is based off of there being a right and a wrong answer, then ultimately, in the game of being able to assume correctly, one then has to understand their own personality in regards to then the forms of inquiry that then surround them, as then if movement is for the appearance of then things either then being a going to a place or a taking apart of a thing or a bringing of a thing, a gathering, a culmination of things, then one has to inquire themselves as to their own assumptions in regards to what it is that they wish to see as either moved or stable. How to properly smoke. when smoking a cigar. Take the nature of ash and find what it demands. Then find variety in its demanding. By finding flavor in what appears to be one's creation of large clouds where rain itself comes from these billowing clouds that then provide shelter for a bounteous harvest. Then, in feeling it coming to an end, to where it feels as though you must let go. But then grab a hold of that variety, that the demanding nature of ash itself seems to limit. What is then an unwrapping finding then deep purples, and a close, watchful eye for the remainder of what it is to maintain a crop with the necessary tools and layout. What is the embers finishing? Then taking the wrappings that were ever so carefully found to be at the point at which one feels themselves letting go. What are then sweet to behold, looking like the veins of grape leaves, and then drinking from these remnants as a cup. That are then found to be likable to the palate, taken under the lip, until one can only go as far as to say that enough has been said.